Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for another edition of Java Chat with Film Incentive Friends. I'm your host, Marco Cordova from Monarch Private Capital. I have here several film incentive experts, Marge Gallus, Nicole Amlin, Ryan Broussard, Deidre Owens, and David Brower. This next segment will talk about hot topics affecting filmmakers now. Obviously, the big talk right now and what we've been dealing with the past couple of years is COVID. So I just wanted to start off the conversation. And Nicole, doing your line of work, what is the main thing you notice about COVID and how it's affecting productions claiming or wanting to claim incentives?
Well, it initially started with what was going to qualify when the spend increased everyone's budgets by millions of dollars sometimes for COVID related costs, whether it be testing, personnel, and so on and so forth, PPE. And so when the pandemic first started, it was what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. And a lot of the jurisdictions came back with, we'll figure it out, just separate the costs. So we would have to create a new grouping or free field coding for COVID costs so that we could set them aside for when the film offices were going to decide what did or did not qualify and how. So it has changed now where jurisdictions have come back and said, okay, now that we are going to allow it to qualify, when is the cutoff date for when we're going to stop that? And so productions that started, I've seen a lot of times where they put the COVID costs aside, they qualified them, film office agreed that they qualified, and then there was some sort of random, if you will, cutoff as to when those costs would qualify. And now what everyone thought would maybe qualify won't qualify. And then lastly, I would say, and now it's now into everyone's making insurance claims for COVID costs. And do these insurance claims now negate the ability of these costs to qualify? And so it's really transformed over these past 2 years that we've had to monitor and determine whether COVID costs qualified, when, what dates, and then what does an insurance claim do to that? Those are the main, I think, topics for the pandemic so far in my line of work.
And David, obviously you're doing a lot of these tax credit audits.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing as far as the states and how they're treating COVID-related costs? Is there some sort of main qualifier, or is it just dependent on each jurisdiction?
It really depends on each jurisdiction. In a state such as California, where you're capped on the amount of credit you can receive, as long as it meets the other requirements, they are qualifiable, and then you just will hit your cap. Most likely, most productions at the start of COVID hit their cap because they incurred a lot more costs than they thought. Going back to Nicole's point with insurance, a lot of these insurance claims will offset your qualified spend. So that spend will go away. And it's been taking quite a long time for these COVID claims to settle. And most jurisdictions I've seen that the settlements, they'll come in with a lump sum number and then have to allocate it to specific productions, or it'll be a lot less than what they submitted for the insurance claim. Now, if that's the case and they get less money, the excess of what was qualified that wasn't covered by the insurance claim will qualify for the incentive. Again, most states, if you're meeting the requirements of testing done in the state or the vendor requirement, they will qualify. Other states now are not qualifying any COVID costs at all. So you really need to double check the state you're incurring your production costs in and what the latest update is as to how they're treating the COVID expenses, not only the testing, but also all the PPE and everything else that is going along with the shooting in a pandemic.
Yeah, if I could chime in for a minute and just have this discussion about what happens if you get your tax credit and the claim amount comes back after, because I've gotten a lot of questions. We're not there yet, right? That's that's our next, panel that we do is going to be what happens when you filed the claim, you got the tax credit, and then the insurance claim came in. what is our obligation then to go back?
So,
how does that handle it?
so I'll give you the answer that always got me correct marks in accounting class. It depends.
Go back.
And we say that because again, what we've done in the past is if the insurance claim is taking a while to settle, some productions then will forgo any incentive on the complete amount of the claim and take the risk that they may or may not be whole by the insurance company in order to get their tax incentive process faster. So it's a more conservative approach, but that's what we've done in the past because you don't know otherwise. So if you're going to forgo all the qualified costs on what you're claiming in insurance, then you could probably move forward with processing your tax credit incentive.
Yeah, and I see a lot of productions getting their tax credits delayed just for this, very reason. It's just taking a long time to get this quantified and figure out the actual number. People are kind of just slow and waiting to hear more guidance. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been taking, we're almost 2 years in, and it's taking quite some time right now to make heads or tails of the settlements. But I've also seen the flip side where they're going to just, with studios at least, they'll give one lump sum and then say, figure out how to allocate it to your productions of everything that you've submitted.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also delaying things like, from a payroll perspective with us, like a media services and cast and crew, it can delay things like I had a show that set up last, I think it was like August or something, and they still haven't shot because they were delayed because either an actor was out with COVID or a crew member, somebody was out with it. So it's completely screwing up people's schedules. Sometimes they have to get a new certificate of insurance from, their production insurance because it expired. I've had that happen on a few shows. So these things from a payroll perspective are happening. And then from the incentive perspective, same deal. People, they need to, like David and Nicole said, they need to budget appropriately, knowing what state you go to. Georgia's a big one right now with COVID, not qualifying most of the expenses there, if not all of them. And like David said, it's kind of a moving target with these states, which is why we try to keep the information as up to date as possible on our websites and when we talk to our clients and our prospects, because, what was in the law or legislation or guidelines 3 months ago are, they can change in 4 months, 3 months, they can change next week. So it's constantly a moving target when dealing with the states. And then another thing that COVID has affected from payroll, and I'm sure Deidre can talk more about this, is with bonding and financing and assuming if there's a bond and stuff, and if there's need to be COVID insurance with bonding and all this type of stuff in order to get a show financed. So all of that kind of plays into a hand as well. Like, are you being realistic about your numbers and what you can really shoot this film for in this day and age?
Why don't you go give us some insight, Deidre?
Well, I think we're seeing, it varies. I think some lenders want to see, still want a bonded show if they're lending against any, minimum guarantees or anything that, or tax credits that require a delivered film. So, a lot of lenders still want to see bonds, and then COVID insurance. But COVID insurance is not super easy to get. It's also not super easy to afford. So some lenders are being more flexible. It's really like it kind of is across the board. What you need to get in order to be able to borrow, what you need in order to get the bond. The bond's not going to cover COVID if the insurance isn't going to cover COVID. So, and we are seeing more shows go without completion bonds for this reason, because the main risk that producers see is COVID, and if you're not going to get coverage for that, they sort of don't see as much of a reason to get a completion bond. Of course, there's other things that the completion bond provides. So, but we are seeing more shows without bonds than we used to see.
And just go ahead.
One of the things I was wondering from what Nicole and David were saying was just sort of, specifically in, maybe some of the most active states, like what we're seeing in terms of whether things qualify or not. Because I think we've been talking about generalities, but I think it might be helpful to find out, for at least some of the more significant states.
So I can tell you,
We're going to start with Georgia, aren't we?
yeah,
we're
well,
gonna-
I was going to leave that till the end, but
I
go for
already
it.
threw out- I
Okay, you
threw
were
out
going to
the
start
seed.
there? Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna actually do a different segment for certain jurisdictions. We're gonna start
Okay.
off with the western states, then central states, and then eastern states. So we could go over that in more detail then.
A good
but-
plug for those.
Yeah, so I just wanted to also chime in with Marge from AFCI. I know that COVID has affected not just domestically, but international filming. Are you seeing any trends as far as domestic and international film commissions? And do you have any insight?
Sure. Thank you, Marco. I think something that's important when a producer, and even stepping before any of the information that was just provided by the panelists here, a producer really has to be very mindful about what the requirements are just for entry into different territories around the world. Here in the US, I think most states at this point have pretty open policies in regards to entry into their regions and states, but that's not quite the same all around the world. And as there have been different variants that have started to pop up every now and then, that really affects the guidelines for entry into different territories. So AFCI has a COVID alert that's on our website for producers to come and take a look at a snapshot of different countries to see what the requirements are. And I think that's kind of just a very basic step to start with before you really get situated in your mind about where you want to shoot. Make sure that you can first gain access to those territories. Another point too about insurance, some film commissions are working with different agencies to assist with insurance for COVID and for production. So it's always worth reaching out to the film commissioner in the territories that you want to shoot to see if they have some resources that can help you out.
Something that, we're talking about trends and hot topics, and while it's not directly COVID related, and that's obviously the hottest topic, as Marco said, but it kind of bleeds into it, is what we're seeing a lot on our side when dealing with accountants is remote work, lack of accountants, all this type of stuff. I mean, I have so many shows saying, I just need an accountant. Give me an accountant, and I know Nicole mentioned at the top of this, that's what she's expanding her company into. And
Correct.
I feel like it's going to, for companies like herself, that'll do it correctly and right. I think it's going to be great. And I think it'll be good for that type of, those types of shows and productions that utilize that. But then there's the flip side of some people still want like a clerk on site, a production person on site. I have some accountants out there that are doing 4 shows and it's just them. And I'm like, you're killing yourself because you don't want to like leave your house, but it's like kind of open that door, right? So the accountants don't want to travel as much anymore. And sometimes neither do the actors. We've got a few actors that work on independent shows and we see them over and over and over again. And they're filming in their home state because they don't want to leave and they don't want to travel because of COVID. So they kind of it's funny, like these trends and hot topics we're seeing, it's kind of connected to COVID, but it's kind of moving the conversation in a little different path. But the remote work, the lack of accountants, all this stuff is something we're seeing on almost every show. It's really amazing to kind of see it and the need for it. So it's very interesting to watch it and see it happen.
Yeah, I've actually had a number of shows because we lend based on an estimate at the beginning of the show. Had a number of shows where when I'm sort of looking at how the spend is working out, it's like, well, why is all of this non-qualified? And there's a number of shows where they assumed the entire production accounting staff would be working in the state, and it just that hasn't happened. So it's you'd think there would be information that the producers would know ahead of time, but sometimes things change. So
Just don't think I don't think they can find them.
Yeah.
I think
no,
that's
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
also,
what's happening. Yeah. And I'm also seeing that they're costing almost double just to get them.
Well, that's a great point too. And I tell people that when I advise people on their budgets, and I tell people this all the time, put your money towards your accounting team. Put it to, I know you got to pay, whether it's double or not, but it's going to save you so much time. And David, you talked to this. And
It will.
So much time on the back end,
Right. Yeah. Because we'll get ledgers that you can tell have been experienced production accountants on them. And of course, people are in a panic to get their tax credit money quickly, but we usually go back to them and say, hey, this we can't utilize this. We're dealing with it right now, actually, on a project that had an email before this where it was something we had to throw back to the production and say, this is not going to be able to be utilized for us to do our audit work. It's just not there.
I think that's where David and I, we get the brunt of not having a good accountant. It causes me a lot more work, and it causes you, David, a lot more work for sure.
Right. Which then ends up defeating the whole thing at the beginning where they don't want to spend the money.
Right.
If you do a bad job, the money you spend in extra interest because it's months of additional delay as things get fixed is usually more than the additional cost of the good accountant.
Twice as long, twice as much.
And I've also seen recently, not even just independents, but even some major studio projects, they kind of effed up, excuse my language, with just missing deadlines and kind of on the application sides. And it's costing some productions millions of dollars. And a lot of that is not having the experienced accountants that Brian mentioned, and also the people who are keeping track. And I've seen, someone coming in as a coordinator and getting promoted twice and maybe becoming the first assistant accountant. That's not good if you're working on your only second or third show and you're like the first. So
and you know what also goes to that is, and I don't want to dog accountants. I talk to accountants all day. I love them. Is you can have a great accountant working on it, and they're working on a giant show, and the studio or finance or the producers or whatever just didn't give them enough money for their team. I mean, there's some states where you need one or two extra people, and I'm sure we'll talk about a few of them in the next panel, where you need one or two extra people just to go over your free fields, just to watch your incentives, just to keep track of things. And if they're not giving you the money for that, I mean, that all falls on one person. You could be the greatest accountant in the world. I mean,
and now also scanning. There's been a shift to all documents being scanned, so you need an additional person just for that.
Right. Once again, going to like the remote work, like how much with COVID, once again, trickling down to the top to hot trends and things we're seeing, everything is being scanned with us. We've had to push at Cast and Crew and Media Services, all digital time cards, starts. People love using digital POs. All this stuff is just so digital. And like you said, if you don't have somebody scanning all that, it's going to eat up somebody's time.
Great. And real quick, just before the end of this segment, I just wanted to really talk about the trend of not having enough sound stages. So that's affecting some states. We'll talk a little bit more about California, for example. But it seems like there's not enough sound stages. There's a lot of new streaming companies wanting content. And, this is also in tying with not enough resources, not enough crew, not enough accountants. But Marge, given that, there's a lot of need for sound stages, is this something you're seeing internationally and domestically where you're seeing more soundstage type credits?
I know California has a credit that was recently announced. I don't know about credits internationally, but I know there's a lot of development for sound stages, and in some instances, major studios like Netflix are getting involved in the building of sound stages, both here in the United States, such as areas like New Mexico, and then overseas, like areas such as Spain. And I know there's developments in UK and Australia, Germany. There's so many sound stages that are being built and developed around the world. I know, and a point of interest for some of our commissioners, as they've been discussing the issues, is what do we do when sound stages are built? Right now, there's such a boon of content being developed. will there be at some point an issue with these stages being built and not enough content to utilize them? So it's an interesting issue that we're reflecting on at this time.
There's a lot of states that do have that facility, as Marco mentioned, an incentive just for using certain facilities, whether it's, Pennsylvania or now Montana has it. You mentioned California and New Mexico has it and a few others. But really the future is kind of, in March, you touched on it, is like what New Mexico did, where they basically say, come and build, make this investment in our state. If you do this type of investment, whether it's building the soundstage or investing in the soundstage, then we will give you, like in New Mexico, they give them untapped caps for the program. Basically, they're uncapped by the program. And like NBC Universal did it, Netflix did it in New Mexico, and then New Jersey recently mirrored that program. Their rewards are a little different in terms of they basically open up caps for above the line and certain above the line people. But I think that is a trend that will definitely grow, is those like filming partners is what they call it. So New Mexico and New Jersey definitely have it. And I think we will see more eventually down the road.
Great.
There's an interestingly, sorry to interject, but I wanted to highlight Cherokee Nation Film Commission, because they recently developed a space
I saw that.
allows for virtual production. So I think that's an interesting model too, when you have the commission that's actually working to help develop something for their community, in this case, especially useful for the Indigenous community, that becomes a shared space and provides a great benefit for producers and people that are looking to film in Oklahoma.
And isn't there someone trying to build a soundstage in outer space? Is it maybe Elon Musk or someone? Has anyone heard about that?
I haven't seen the moon
Tom
incentive.
Cruise thing,
The
right? He
moon-
wants to film
Okay.
a movie. I think that's
Yeah.
Tom Cruise who wants to film a movie.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, we could see that later.
David, you're working on the guidelines for Saturn, right? As we do,
Yeah.
you're working on the
I
audit
just
requirements for that?
finished Mars, so now I got to move on.
Okay. Okay, with that, that concludes our hot topics. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about Western states in our next segment. Thank you.